Well, we don't need any introduction to today's guest. It's Bob Powell, journalism legend. Legend. It's pretty nice to be called legend by multiple sources, Bob.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're a source for that, but thank you.
And it's different than the first time we tried to record, which is that the Boston Celtics have new life. Is it
Oh my
possible?
goodness, I went from being so depressed to almost elated, but it's still a long stretch, right? The only time I think in my memory that something of this sort could happen was when the Red Sox beat the Yankees in '04,
Right.
right down 3-1, and came back to miraculously win that series and then go on to win the World Series.
How do you remember that? You were like 2 years old. You've got an incredible memory.
Could you imagine? Like, I don't feel my age, Jay. I don't know
Right.
about you, but I don't feel my age. But I'm
Yeah.
I'm old as the mountains. Yeah.
Well, that's a great segue because as we were talking, as you know, we saw each other 2 weeks ago. It seems like 5 weeks ago, but in Washington, D.C. at the Alliance for Lifetime Income conference. And I thought it was very interesting. Michael Clinton was there. Richard Leader was there. These are authors of prominent books talking about the age of process and finding a purpose as people, reach a kind of like a weird random number of 65 that you've been so good in our conversations, but it's been quite a conference. We'll get into that coming up next. So Bob, without getting too far down the wormhole, if you had to choose two takeaways, your two big themes, in addition to, of course, the most important comments, which were yours, but besides that, what were the two takeaways? And we'll get into it from there. What did you think?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway was a conversation, a presentation by Shlomo Bernatzi, and where he talked about there not necessarily being a perfect product, but that there's a perfect process to come up with the perfect plan for you. And it's really important, I think, for the financial services industry to sort of take heed of that message that it's all about the process and it's not about what you think the product should be or what the strategy should be. It's really about what the process leads you to help you create the perfect plan for a client. And it reminds me, Jay, just for sake of history, Andy Lowe from MIT recently co-wrote a book called The Perfect Portfolio, where he interviewed several of the leading, investment minds, right? Like
Right.
Bill Sharp and whatever. And none of them could agree on what the perfect portfolio was. But Andy Lowe's conclusion was that there is a perfect portfolio for you. It's really about the process that gets you there.
I mean, you hijacked my hot take there,
Oh
Bob,
my
because
goodness. No, I'm
literally,
sorry.
literally, it's literally the exact phrase that I would have agreed with as far as my number one, because we've had at the attendees and all the presenters, the panelists have deep experience, whether that be at their RIA, whether that be at their carrier level. That was the cream of the crop for sure, regarding, the attendees. Nevertheless, the process, as you said, I generally tell people, let the sellers figure out the product. I promise you they're highly motivated and they've got tons of resources to do so. Don't worry about that. What you do need to worry about, okay, well, in minestrone soup, I'm allergic to oregano, or I need extra pepper. And then don't worry, the chefs are plenty equipped, especially in this particular crowd that was there, from Goldman to Allianz to, the big law firms creating complicated language, but to create tailored products to fit needs. I thought that was, absolutely outstanding.
The
What was
second
your other
point,
one? If you go ahead, sorry.
yeah, I mean, well, just you asked for 2 points. So the second point was,
Sure.
how does there was a consumer panel, and one of the folks talked about, how can the industry, the profession, I like to call it a profession, but a lot of people call it an industry still.
Right.
Um, and in part it's an industry because sometimes they refer to the people who are selling these products as producers as opposed to investment advisors. But that's a discussion maybe for later, Jay. Is this?
Right.
But the notion is, how do we help? There's plenty of help for people who have $1 million and more, but how do we help the vast majority of Americans who have $1 million or less in their retirement accounts? And who do they turn to for advice? And if it's technology, what do they need to know about the limitations of technology if it is, if that's the solution for them? Because somehow, some way, we need to help the people who need it the least have the most help, and the people who
Right.
need it the most have the least help.
I couldn't agree with you more. Obviously, you've been so good. Our conversations on thestreet.com, finstream.tv, we've talked a lot about healthcare cost planning, ultimately. I find it very strange in the sense that, just along the lines you said, we evaluate companies, Facebook, for example, General Mills, and those are just two examples, not only on the revenue side, but also, are they controlling their costs and their liability side? Yet when we talk about financial planning, all of the attention sits on the asset accumulation, the rate of growth, returns, Social Security planning, which is, of course, the income stream, even the alliance itself, as excellent as it is. I was stunned a bit in the sense that not enough attention on the building block, and especially for that demographic you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Right. To someone, I tell our clients over here, financial planning clients who are very well off, there's no scenario really that they're going to run out of money. Mm. That person, I tell them, yeah, I'm going to help you with Medicare, but I've just swatted off a gnat off your shoulder. It's not really, a big determinant for them in terms of moving the needle on their net worth or their cash flow.
Yeah.
But for someone with a couple of $100,000, that is an entirely different deal, which is now mishandled or not completely thought through on the liability side, cost, which is, cost cutting. We wouldn't imagine evaluating General Mills or Facebook without looking at that side.
Yeah.
Yet we do that in financial planning.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. During the consumer panel, I think there was the couple that was there sort of said, as they're thinking about retirement, that they really don't have a sense of how much they spend. I got the sense that everything that comes in goes out the door on expenses, whether it's essential or discretionary or not. And so I think for most financial planners, and one of the things when advisors are building retirement income plans, they rely on technology. One of the comments I think I made is, when you think about the liability side and the cost, housing, transportation, healthcare, et cetera, gifts, travel, whatever it might be, to me, it's a row by row, column by column exercise. And it's labor intensive to go through that kind of budgeting exercise with clients to say, what will your expenses be in retirement, not just tomorrow, but the next year and the year after and the year after. And then factor in some esoteric things like David Blanchett, who was in attendance, has done research that shows that spending declines on a real basis. So, right. How do you factor in the possibility that spending will decline, as you go from your go-go to slow-go years, and then may increase in your no-go years as your healthcare expenses rise? And so it gets really complicated. And I'm not sure technology is accommodating the nuances of spending in retirement as you think about the possibility that it declines on a real basis, and that some categories of spending will rise on a real basis.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty interesting that we have hints of awareness of the topic. There are a number of attendees making mention of the fact that they're trying to help advisors themselves. I know that you're involved in that to some degree, meaning, for example, you've run seminars aimed at women, for example, who are going through life-changing events and all of a sudden may have had to be introduced to a whole slew of new topics that they were not necessarily not trained, but they're not used to. That was not their responsibility in their nuclear family unit. And then all of a sudden it becomes entirely their responsibility. I think that those types of groups are becoming aware, but just like you said, it's difficult. The technology, we had some panelists about building out kind of some platforms. And there are tools certainly online, but again, they're still talking about what's my likelihood of, you know, given my portfolio return 60/40, whatever it would be, given a Monte Carlo simulation and all sorts of fancy math, that you get this idea of here's your likelihood of being able to live comfortably. But without really tweaking the, like, just like you pointed out, for me, that's not only the level, but on the liabilities, especially on healthcare cost planning, that it's not only the level, but it's also the variability, right? Which is that for a person who, and I call these people, you know, either Mr. Perfect like you or Miss Sick a lot, right? I mean, which is, and these two people are so different. And I think that that's kind of what I'd like to talk about now, which is that, just like you said, the keynote speech during lunchtime was by Shlomo Bernatzi, who is professor emeritus at UCLA Anderson, a school I could never go to because I would have never studied. The weather was way too good. I'm from the Midwest over here.
That's why you went to Chicago, like, where the weather is terrible. You had to go to class.
100%. I was like, I got to Westwood. I'm like, no, yeah, beautiful place. No, okay, I'm gonna flunk out. There's like no way. There's no way I get really sitting there. And that's just the weather, by the way. I'm not even talking about other types of distractions. Anyway, the thing is that what he said a number of things that I remember, but one of them was that there's no income plan, first of all. And then in addition to that, that the health quotient, the survey, he has some survey which people evaluated their health score. And that health score vary in the sense that their life expectancy then moved around from, I want to say it was from 5 to 8 years. And he said it kind of in passing, but he didn't stop there. I wanted to stop him there and ask a question. It was my first time at the conference. I'm new to the alliance, so I was like, okay, I'll try not to, you know, make waves from here. But my first thought was, haven't you now just changed the entirety of the time horizon of all the rows and the columns that you just mentioned, the perfect portfolio that you just mentioned? That while the RIAs, and nothing against, they're doing what they're supposed to, they mentioned scalability a number of times regarding the challenges of educating advisors on annuities and protected income. That one of the things that wasn't in there really, or paid attention, was to the fact that these time horizons across people would vary by that degree. I was stunned. I didn't know. Of course, when I deal with individuals, that's just kind of, that's my first stop, is the candid reality. I don't let people discuss, you know, this is how much money we've had. I'm saying, first tell me about your health and tell me about your family history. Because it's really, okay, this person needs, much like protected income could be, lifetime protected income. Okay, how do we lower the liabilities? How do we control costs? And not only that, also very importantly, how do we reduce the volatility, the variance, the up and down? If, you know, if health insurance costs $500 a month, so be it. But what I also don't want is, how exposed, how likely, how probable is it that it's minus $50,000 in a year? And Professor Bernatzi actually gave us a window. He gave us a window by saying the people actually know. Yeah. That they actually know. And this is what I've been saying, which is that, you know, Bob already knows, you know, you look in your mirror and say, hey, I'm Bob, I'm Mr. Perfect. You know, I never say, for example, or Miss Sikalak says, my older sister, my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, they all passed away from breast cancer. Sorry, you're not the average case. And that changes everything. And then from there, the ripple effect. And I think that we need to have that first, even before we get to, and then the acceptance of all the products, like Professor said. And that was my view takeaway.
And that dovetails, I think, into one of the things I mentioned during my 10 minutes of fame when they asked for my three major points, which is,
it's more than 10, Bob, but
all right, well, 11. So it's that notion of, how do we help advisors who heretofore have been helping their clients save and accumulate vast sums of money for retirement to then start thinking about all the risks that they'll face in retirement and making sure that that money does last, right? And so you've got inflation and market risk and sequence of return risk and longevity risk and et cetera, and healthcare shocks, in there as well. And how do we help advisors sort of understand these risks and the ways to manage and mitigate these risks and the probabilities of these risks happening and the negative consequences that occur because of these things happening, and come up with plans to say, yeah, we've addressed this risk and this is how we're going to manage it. We know that you have that you're healthy and you're expected to live a long life, so we're going to use protected lifetime income for that. But we also know that inflation could erode your standard of living, so we're going to have this plan in place for that. And then we know that you're healthy or not healthy, and here's how we're going to accommodate both ordinary and expected healthcare costs, but maybe the cost of long-term care or healthcare shocks, right? And it's really coming up with, the tools are there, right? The tools are there. Whether there's a desire and the means to go through that, again, that's one more labor-intensive exercise in addition to figuring out what the liabilities are and what their sources of income will be. Add one more complex thing to this retirement income planning process. But we got to get there, because the degree to which someone goes through these steps is the degree to which the confidence on the part of the advisor rises, but also the confidence rises on the part of the client, right?
Absolutely. I was stunned by the fact that we have not, as a industry, a profession, whatever it would be, actually hasn't, correctly or even accurately, informed the consumer. There is a woman who did not have $1 million, but she actually stated she didn't know that a product existed to build an extra layer of income that would never end. Didn't even know that this kind of thing existed.
Yeah.
So I was shocked, actually, that people didn't know this, that these kinds of tools exist. And kind of back to, Professor Bernardsey, it's like once you have kind of what your need and process of what you actually are trying to do well defined, that don't worry about it. Wall Street will figure out how to plug in to create the widget in order to plug into the spot. I mean, that I'm from there, I can tell you, right? I promise you that. So that part was kind of very shocking, because it kind of dovetails exactly with what you were saying, is that above $1 million we've got, in multiples of that, the idea of lifetime income may or may not be as key, because their probability of running out of assets is low. But to a person below $1 million, it can be such a vital tool. And it's kind of this particular weird combination that the people who are absolutely qualified to describe this to the general public isn't the persons who are interfacing with the general public. Right? You see what I'm saying? So the people in that room, for example, and I don't even remember what the total number of attendees plus panelists were, but I very frequently don't make comments, because I'm like, well, to this crowd, they're all going to roll their eyes because what I'm saying is so obvious. Right?
Yeah.
But by that same token, the fact is that the other persons who really need it, 400,000, 500,000, for example, they wouldn't classify themselves as necessarily wealthy.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, they're the persons who could absolutely benefit from X dollars more on top of Social Security I kind of, you can't have everything in a conference, of course. You can never.
Yep.
But it's kind of, there were a couple of firms that do whose distribution channels are to persons with less than $1 million. And I'm not going to name their names here,
Yeah.
but they're actually niche of the world.
Yeah.
And, I think it's an open question of whether or not those advisors, brokers are equipped,
Yeah.
either from management or for themselves,
Yeah.
to kind of help their clients on this, complicated jigsaw puzzle that they have to put together themselves.
Yeah. So two things. One is I mentioned during the conference my thoughts about the training and education that's required
Right.
advisors there. I'll come back to
Right.
that. But it's also I think in terms of those advisors, there's a very simple message that I think was developed years ago by a gentleman named Farrell Dolan, who really sort of, he described it as the 4-box strategy, Jay. And it was a strategy where you said, we're going to take your guaranteed sources of income, Social Security, defined benefit, whatever it might be, and match that income against your essential expenses. And if there's a gap,
Right.
we'll take from your risky assets that money and plug the gap with either income annuities or annuities of some sort, or a systematic withdrawal income plan from the risky assets. And to which I sometimes say, and I quote Zvi Bodhi, professor emeritus at Boston University, who was fond of saying, why would you use a risky asset to cover essential expenses? Why would you put your standard of living at risk if knowing that those expenses need to be paid, and you're using an asset that goes up and down in value and may or may not be there to pay for those expenses that you view as essential and part of your standard of living? Which brings me back to this notion of, a guaranteed protected lifetime income fills that gap. And then you can still have your risky assets for discretionary expenses,
Right.
and upside and inflation protection, et cetera, et cetera. But at a minimum, people want to go to sleep knowing that their expenses are covered, that there's a paycheck coming in month over month or quarter over quarter that guarantees their desired standard of living. And it just makes sense to me, if you're an advisor, to explain it in as simple terms as that would resonate with people.
I think that is an excellent point. And I write down little phrases, and when people speak them aloud, I'm sure you have the same, right? Because in the sense that we're sitting here on video, and it's YouTube's world, or video's world, where we're trying to create phrases that resonate and people can remember. And the one that I remember from the conference was, and I do want to say it was Professor Bernarzi again, which is, he said, quote unquote, license to spend.
Mm.
And the extra layer does do that, whether that, and license to spend may be, and I tell this to other people, is maybe that's a license to punt financial markets. If that's what makes if that makes your blood flow because you want to take more risk, et cetera, or have a different risk profile just because you have an aggressive set of objectives, you have, or et cetera, or you have a fascination with either markets or current events or whatever it would be. Well, if you have these extra cushions and knowledge about, like you said, the protected income, and you can understand why I'm probably part of the alliance, right? Because I'm also, it's kind of like the absolute value of the income, which is, okay, on the flip side, on the liability side, can we reduce it, which is the same thing as increasing guaranteed income, right? And then also reduce the variability, meaning the predictability, if you will, within a person's budget. And then, of course, with the restraint being, well, you've got to be able to afford it. I didn't tell people don't eat and then become insurance poor, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's been fascinating in the sense that, like you said, from Professor Bodhi, who, and I have read this kind of his writings, which is that, yeah, in essence, isn't that just an allocation matter?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, okay, fine, we need to have this essential income in order to pay for essential expenses, of which healthcare costs being, an increasing part of that number, and huge number, is that, okay, doesn't that give you then license then to do with the risky side as you deem fit.
Yeah.
Some people are because they don't know that these products exist. What ends up happening is, and at lower income levels, they're worried about running out, that they end up weirdly, perversely, having to be more aggressive because they already know on day one that Social Security may not be enough. They're going to live to 130. And, they have that combination, and also their nest egg not large enough. And so that then become the forced risk. So you've got these very strange combinations because of the fact that people, as most people know, and I don't like being alarmist, but retirement time bomb, if you will, is these kinds of phrases, that looks like clickbait to me, but I just like, these are our facts. We're here now. Let's deal with them the best that we can with a proper set of knowledge. So it's been fascinating. It was a fascinating thing.
Yeah.
Any other big takeaways
Well,
for
well, two things. Just a reaction to what you said about license to spend, and I think what's interesting about having an annuity, and I think some of the work that David Blanchett and Michael Finke have done, look at that notion of having an annuity gives you a license to spend, as well as what Shlomo mentioned, is the notion that on the one hand, life cycle finance says that people want to maximize utility across their life cycle when they're young and middle age and old age. And but what oftentimes happens in old age is people stop spending, right? Stop maximizing their utility because they don't know how long they're going to live and how long their money will last, et cetera, et cetera. So having the annuity at least gives someone the opportunity perhaps to maximize their utility. And then the other, from a behavioral perspective, people are reluctant to spend and because there's no paycheck coming in anymore, right? And so they don't know, where their money's going to come from, and again, how long it's going to last, and whether they'll outlive it, et cetera, et cetera. So I think advisors have to sort of approach it both academically, like how do we think about it from a life cycle perspective? How do we help them maximize utility? And then how do we, from a behavioral finance perspective, how do we have them overcome this bias that they have, perhaps, that says they have this emotional bias that says I'm going to run out of money, and then that I think creates this notion of what I'll describe as the training and education that's required that will help advisors sort of facilitate the conversations and create the plans that are necessary. I look at it this way, Jay, like all the training and education, whether it's through the CFP or other places, has always been focused on accumulation, right? Modern portfolio,
100%, absolutely,
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in part because of the way training has been created and because of job task analysis, et cetera, et cetera, we haven't created enough training and education to help advisors figure out the retirement income phase of their client's life cycle. There is the RICP from the American College. There is the Retirement Management Advisor from the Investments and Wealth Institute, both designations I'm well familiar with. There are a couple others, lesser known. But if you think about, like, there are almost 100,000 CFPs in this world, and maybe 10,000 RICPs, and maybe a couple thousand RMAs. It's just not enough training and people who are trained out there to build these plans that will meet the demand that's out there right now, right? I mean, clients are aging, advisors are aging. We're approaching, what was it described, peak 65, where 12,000 people a day will turn 65. There's a vast need, right? They call it, 3 to 5 million people a year turn 65. And there's an unmet need out there to help people create plans. And I think training and education would go a long way toward helping solve part of this problem.
If only a larger fraction of the 12,000 people a day would buy some random book that we may know about.
Yeah. It would go a long way
in many ways, more than one, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, isn't there? I mean, the biggest fear I think that people have is taking that step from being a full-time FT employee to to sort of like figuring out how do I generate the cash flow, as Dana Anspach described it as, how do I generate the cash flow to support the rest of my life when I don't have a W-2 check coming in?
I think that one thing it's this particular very weird combination of, facts, which is that if I pulled the curtain back on the liability side, and you've been so good in our conversations on Retirement Daily and on FinStream that we've discussed a lot about, for example, pre-Medicare.
Mm.
That if you think about the timing of retirement, and that can also mean early retirement, it does not necessarily mean that the person has to work till the absolute end of full retirement age, but that if people would have planned, that people have this fear, even prior to Medicare, certainly, that, okay, I don't like my job, or I think that I might be able to retire. I don't really know, because they don't understand the way that health insurance works, because the employer has been providing it. So as a result, the employer has two or three selections. They ask their colleagues at work. They choose one. That it seemed to work out for Mr. Perfect, even though I'm Miss Sick a lot. They choose the same plan, for example, or etc. And then there are, of course, HSAs and other things that are going on in the real world. But as a result, they're not familiar with the language and how it actually is, what it actually is, how it actually works. And you've been so good, and we've been trying to give, digestible snippets, because I explained to my colleagues at the Alliance for Lifetime Income that, do you realize this number is 5 digits a year in APTC, for example?
Yeah.
And that, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act, that it entirely changes the possibility and the timing of retirement for those people who desire. Because it's kind of like like I said, when healthcare cost planning is the negative or the absolute value of this extra, less expenses is the same as more income.
Right.
Well, if all of a sudden, dollar saves a dollar earned. I'm pretty sure I learned that, in second grade or something like that, right? A penny saved, a penny earned. But the issue is that if I told you that is when you can get that at 62, and the number is 5 digits running, and then when you turn 65, it drops again, and now all of a sudden your column by column analogy that you used can be wildly different. And yet we have this world where, like you said, at that 55, all of the attention is on accumulation. Like 100% of the 98%, whatever, it's something astronomically high. But that's kind of like saying, okay, well, we're going to evaluate Facebook only on the top line, even though we're going to spend, $1 million an employee for something like that. And, a securities analyst would say, your expenses are bloated,
Yep.
and also unknown. But yet here, unknown is a $10,000 a year opportunity cost in certain cases, which can basically open the door to say, oh, well, this is now possible. That's now possible. Now you get to Michael Clinton's, Roar. You get to Richard Leder's book about finding purpose, etc., and moving on with your next stage of life, which is all possible at younger ages. So it's not always negative. I mean, I didn't want to leave our
No,
viewing audience with only negatives.
no, it's not only negative. It's realistic, though, I think, Jay, right? I mean, I think the one other comment that I made during my remarks is this notion of financial advisors. I finished a fellowship at Columbia University that was focused on caregiving, and they referred to it as the $500 million problem out there.
Right.
And
For sure.
and the degree to which advisors may need to help their clients who might now need elder plans to figure out whether they're going to become a caregiver or a recipient of care, and what that entails with respect to the legal documents like healthcare proxies and DNRs and MOLS and durable powers of attorney, living wills, medical directives, et cetera, right? All the things that now sort of, encroach upon the financial life, right? That you need.
Absolutely.
So, it gets more, I always say, when I think about retirement in general, when I've given speeches, is, we want to make it simple, but ultimately it's complex. It's filled with
Right.
contradictions, right?
Right.
It's filled with ever changing things. We have secured 2.0 to deal with now. We have new research. We have new products, right? Years ago, people looked at reverse mortgages, for instance, and thought, oh, those are just for poor people. And then research
Right.
was done to say, oh, this is a great way to manage sequence of return risk, or this was a great way to, do XYZ to manage income so that you're not exposed to income related monthly adjustment amounts, right? There's all this new thinking. And so to me, it's an exciting field, right? People say, well, why don't I retire? And I'm like, it's too much fun. There's an ever changing world to help educate people about these complicated topics. By the way, I should mention that our conversations that we do about Medicare and healthcare planning on Retirement Daily and FinStream are among the most watched videos that we produce, showing that there's a untapped need out there, right? That we're reaching into a world where people are thirsting for this information and don't know where to turn to it. So I just wanted to say thank you for helping. I always say my pat phrase is sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us, and it's earnest when I say that, because it is your knowledge and wisdom that you're sharing, and it's helping people.
The number of people touched, right, at every income class. I mean, all of us know someone who as just as capable as we might be, but they were unlucky, unfortunate, whatever, or luckier, either way, so that some set of circumstance they could have lost what I call the DNA coin flip.
Yeah.
Right, even though their capabilities professionally or personally are, exceed, mine certainly, but for whatever reason, and or we would know somebody, or by 2 degrees of separation. There's almost no way that not every single person that will watch or that you will reach, has two, and that's all the way down to Medicaid. That's why actually I swerve out of my way to help Medicaid people, because of the fact that I know that dollar, right? That is literally food, right? So if it can unlock a little bit of, and of which I can give that information for free quickly, well, of course, why wouldn't I? I mean, I'm still a citizen of the human race,
Yeah.
of humanity. So
Yeah.
the one thing is that, in back to your combinations here, what's on tap for Bob? We're running out of time, so I'll let you, I'm going to move to the side here. Like you said, you're gainfully always busy and things like that. FinStream, retirement and daily, and your different locations for speaking. What do the next time frame in the media room look for his plans and
Well, so
gathering all your
I,
contacts, etc.?
yeah. So I'll share with you sort of, it's on my bucket list, and it's I really want to go around the country and interview people. I'll call it, for lack of a better term, profiles in success. I want to interview retirees about how they were able to achieve what they set out to achieve, in terms of either how they saved, how they invested, how they're managing in retirement. What is it that allowed them to create this successful retirement, and see if there's some common themes. There's a book I'm really fond of that was written by Carl Pillimore out of Cornell, which was called 30 Lessons for Living. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or not, Jay, but
I'm
he had
not.
done research around our nation's elders, and in essence, the book is it's a reflection of their collective wisdom. And most of it's around careers and love and marriage and raising a family. And very little of it is about retirement per se. So that's in the back of my head, is the model for this is, the collective wisdom of retirees and how they got there. And it would be fun to go travel around the country. So I'd get a chance to go visit some national parks that I want to go see. And then
Right.
also maybe share, again, the wisdom of people who have done it with others who are trying to do it.
That'd be interesting. You could make a collage of all the different stories from different people's, walks of life. I could do the same. I could probably do it now to some degree, just because of client base and different people. And
Yep.
what ends up happening is, I've got my sandwich generation daughter who I've now tasked with all of this stuff, and these people who do not know about Medicare but have the task.
Yep.
And you and I are not going to settle this. We know that this stack of paper ends up on the responsible adult female's, desk. I mean, it's like 90% of the cases I'm maybe low there,
Yeah.
but the different amounts of their challenges and what they found rewarding and the choices they've had to make, is a crazy varied collage. So,
Yeah.
any what's next for Finstream and Retirement Daily? We can just keep
So
fighting the good fight.
FinStream is growing, where we add new distribution partners each and every day. We are adding new content each and every day. I think our next challenge is to we're adding advertisers as we speak. The biggest challenge for FinStream ultimately is like the challenge that everyone faces on the internet, and that's eyeballs. So the more eyeballs that we get, the more likely it is that will be a financial success. One of the interesting things is, you look at the world like CNBC and Bloomberg and CNBC or Yahoo Finance,
Sure.
you're looking at millions, if not billions of page views. And that's the world in which you're competing. But our point of view on FinStream is that we have a lane that is, for the moment, open, which is to a large degree, most of the investment websites and TV shows focus on investing and less so on personal finance. And our hope is that we can create a lane that is focused on personal finance, and help educate people at all life cycle, at all ages, for all topics, for women, for people of color, to do it with short form, intermediate, and long form videos that are aimed at various sort of knowledge levels as well, beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And I'll describe it as a content grid that's sort of 3D in nature. And the goal is to fill in each of those cells with content. So everything from basic budgeting to complicated estate planning, marital deductions, et cetera, and everything in between. And we think there's, like I said, we think there's a lane to educate people to do financial education about personal finance for a wide variety of people. So that's our goal. And we're in the words of James Collins from his book, Good to Great, we're pushing the flywheel. It's slow at first, and hopefully at some point the flywheel spins faster and faster.
That sounds great. And that dovetails and works very well with thestreet.com, your work at Retirement Daily. Most of the people got eyeballs clearly because of everyone's looking at, well, first of all, how do we undershoot NVIDIA? Yes, by that degree. And and it's pretty funny. Like no one complains when the mistakes are to the upside.
Yeah.
That's right. I was like,
no one complains. Yeah.
But I'm like, how do we get it? How do we miss by this amount? I mean, the opposite of missing by overshooting is you've also wildly undershot. So it's been pretty great.
I don't know. All I know is, Jim Cramer used to be a, part of the street. He's now at CNBC. His show Mad Money is both revered and heckled, right, for his ability to get things wildly wrong and wildly right at times. So,
right.
I don't know what chance do us mere mortals have of getting it right all the time. What chance? I'll just close with this statement, Jay, which is, I think when I think about Medicare, I think it's one of the cruelest things that we have ever done to our nation's elders, which is to make them decide each and every year which plan is right for them, as their as Michael Finke has done in his research shows. Your cognitive abilities decline, but your confidence level in your decisions, in essence, rises. So you make you're increasingly confident about the wrong decisions you're making. And so to me, it's one of the cruelest things that we can do, but I understand that we have to do it because, right, everything changes. And so
that's right.
It would be easy to over and undershoot, I guess, maybe your Medicare decisions too, right?
Yeah, your Medicare decisions are difficult. I mean, and I don't sit in front of the mirror and pat myself on the back and self-congratulatory. I mean, my book and the efforts around the book, I get a very solid D- in the sense that if I had to do it over, which would not be successful, I don't suspect. So there is a reason, meaning that the person that really needs the book is 62-year-old sandwich generation person.
Yeah.
Because just like you said, it's not only for themselves,
Yeah.
but they get the stack of responsibility in many cases. And whenever we get approached by someone 83, 84, 85, my question is, who else is going to be on the call?
Yeah.
Who else is going to be with you so that you can read emails and remember, we can record the calls, you can ask and then bounce to make sure that your recollection was correct.
Yeah.
So that someone else there in your that can be an adult's child, that can be a younger niece, nephew. Jay does not care. Yeah. But very important that someone, as your abilities to reason through things, remain, you kind of have someone with, people may say, okay, well, Jay, you're just a producer, you're a financial person, we don't trust you. I feel a lot more comfortable, many levels more comfortable, when I know that there's an additional person, to try to, assist. It's so complicated.
So the last thing I'll mention, as you say, a person to help you. I would recommend that folks not use artificial intelligence as the vehicle by which they get their questions answered. I've been experimenting with it. I mentioned this during the conference. It gets some things right. It gets a lot of things wrong, and it misses, and it doesn't necessarily tell you. There's a lot missing that it should tell you. So there's, as Charlie Munger said during the recent Berkshire Hathaway meeting, when asked about artificial intelligence, he said, "I kind of prefer the old-fashioned kind of intelligence." And I think, to which I say, the artificial intelligence is no substitute for the kind of work you're doing, one-on-one with people, Jay.
Yeah, I think that I tell persons that we're going to use, I use artificial intelligence all the time, in the sense of helping us write, helping us create content, helping us get us out of the starting block, if you will, is what I try to say. I use it for. And then maybe I've missed a concept that I don't usually talk about, for example, which does deserve recognition and mention. But like you said, at this point, is it able to tease out or point out every detail? No. And then also, because every person is different, every person's utility function for a different number of reasons is so different, that what I have to communicate about that specific topic will differ just on that alone, even if the financial facts and their health facts, where they live, is identical. Just the utility function alone tells me, okay, out of this 500 details, this person needs those 4 details, and the cloned brother with a slightly different utility function needs 4 details, yes, 4 entirely different details. And AI is just going to and unfortunately, it's just going to list them without the proper emphasis to match the utility. I mean, before we get down the wormhole of that could be an entirely different, separate 2-hour, 10-hour conversation. One good thing is we'll have to see. I think it's still early. AI learns. Yeah. And I can tell you that I've been on board on ChatGPT since last year, pretty much during the holiday season. My computer was basically on 20 hours a day, because literally I do my professional work, but then I'd be like, what is this? What is this? From Mid-Journey to ChatGPT. And I can say that, the pace of improvement is incredible as well. So it's still early doors, as the English would say.
Yes, it is. And I'm with you. I'm using it, experimenting with it, testing it. I think it holds a lot of promise, but ultimately it's not there yet. But I wouldn't stop using it because it's not there yet.
Right. Well, you'll be able to supervise people. There will be people and I don't need to even start to say that people's career paths are now probably irrevocably different. In 6 months, it's been incredible.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad I'm old because I don't want to have to like compete against AI for my job.
35. I tell people, AI is not going to run the world, but the people who do adapt AI are going to dominate compared to the people who refuse to adjust. I don't think there's any question about that.
Yeah.
So he's Bob Powell. He is the very well-known, prominent financial journalist from TheStreet.com, Retirement Daily, and co-founder of FinStream.tv. All the links will be part of the video. Bob, we talk personally and things like that. Thank you so much. We could go on, we could have our own Bob and Jay's
I
Daily
think
and
that would
talk
be
like
fun,
this.
but I'm afraid I may have exhausted the wealth of knowledge in my head in this episode.
I highly doubt that, Bob. I highly doubt that. Thank you so much, Bob. Once again, look forward to the next time.
Thank you.